910.
All right, Scott, before we get into these games, I don't know if you saw the story. I'm assuming you did, with this guy in Kentucky that's betting $3.1 million on the Eagles-Panthers game. First, have you seen it? Did you see the story?
I haven't read it yet. I kind of heard a little bit about it earlier, but I haven't read it, so I don't know the details of it.
So walk us through how something like that would even go down. Like, you just walk up to the to the guy and say, "Hey, I want to put $3.1 million on the money line on Eagles." I mean, how does that work?
Well, most books won't take a big bet like that anymore. But you know what a lot of books will do is, and they will never tell you, is that they'll take the $3.1 million bet and then they'll go lay off at other books.
Oh.
You know, so yeah, a book might have 10 different sports books that they can lay money off, you know, spread it out over 10 books so they don't get damaged too badly if they lose. So that's why I always say, you know, kind of take it with a grain of salt when you hear a sports book saying, "Oh man, we got beat up over the weekend. Oh, they crushed us," you know, and that rarely happens. And yeah, exactly. They could just lay off if they had to. I don't know what book it was because I didn't read it, but you know, most of books won't take that kind of bet anymore. There's, you know, you can find a couple of books here in Las Vegas that'll still do that once in a while, but it's rare.
It was the Circa Sports book.
Oh, okay, yeah, and Derek Stevens. There you go. Derek Stevens will take a bet. You know, there's no doubt about that.
He's quoted. Yep. Yeah. Okay.
And he, I've done a lot of shows at the Circa, and in fact, 2 years ago, I did every Saturday night an NFL preview show, and he would be on before we'd get going, and he has no problem taking that kind of bet and stand up. So you know, the Circa will take the chance, and also, you know, if I'm Derek Stevens, he's a master marketer. I'm thinking about the publicity I'm getting also. Not that the Circa needs it, but again, you're getting a lot of publicity for that $3 million bet.
It's literally the first story on the right side of ESPN.com. So you're right. Yeah, he's a good marketer. He got up there right away. So, all right, let's get into these games. Let's start with UNLV at Boise State. The winner goes to the college football playoff, and the loser goes to a bowl, likely the LA Bowl versus Cal or some other former Pac-12 school. Boise State minus 4.5. That's still the case, and how are you handicapping this?
Yeah, still 4.5 for the most part. And, you know, we've been saying for 30 years, next year is our year, UNLV. Yeah. So here we go. But listen, the line has been as low as 3.5. It was as high as 6.5 when it opened at a couple of books. And it's 4, like you said, just about everywhere. The total dipped down a couple of points from its opener. I think it's going to be very interesting on which star player for which team gets it going, because Ashton Genty, he averaged 7.7 yards per carry against everyone not named UNLV. Against UNLV, 3.9 yards per carry earlier this season, so half of what he normally does. UNLV led in the fourth. Boise comes back to win 29-24. And then the player who has to get it going for UNLV is Ricky White, the wide receiver, 2,500 yards the last couple of seasons. He has, 98 yards or more in 6 games this season receiving. He only had or averaged 71 yards in 2 games against Boise last year and this year. So one of those two stars has to stand up. Here's why I think UNLV's got a shot tonight, guys. If you look at the last 4 games for these two teams, they're trending in opposite directions. UNLV blew out 3 of their 4 opponents, and they're averaging 275 rushing yards per game on 5.5 per carry. And they held those 4 opponents to 74 yards rushing on 2.5 yards per carry. And then Boise's last 4 games, squeaked by Nevada Reno 28-21. It's a 28-21 game against San Jose with 2.5 minutes to go. They get late scores. Trailed Wyoming with just over 5 minutes to go. They win that 17-13. And last week against Oregon State, it's a 9-point game. They get a touchdown in the final seconds to win by 16. So they've been far from dominant. And good news for the desert dwellers, it's going to be cold, but minimal winds and no precipitation at last check. So I think UNLV's got a great shot to win this game.
Well, this next game, we don't have to worry about whether it's going to be indoors at AT&T. Iowa State taking on the Sun Devils. Last I looked, it was ASU minus 1.5. You got a heck of a running game in ASU. Iowa State struggles that way. How do you see this one playing off? Or do you think it'll become a pick'em by this time tomorrow, before the game?
Yeah, it could come down a little bit. I know a lot of people who are on the Cyclones. They actually, at one book that got out in front of everybody else, opened the line had Iowa State a 1.5-point favorite on Sunday night, and then it's gone the other way. You know what's interesting? And I asked the guy who played offensive line for Nebraska, for the New York Giants, Rob Zatishka the other night. Do you think the Cyclones should stay in their 335 the entire game? Is it too late in the season to maybe go 43 a couple of times because of Scadaboo? They don't have Jordan Tyson, which means Scadaboo's even more important than he has been. I worry about ASU not having another wideout who's done a lot this year. I think their top wideout has 17 receptions in 11 games. And, of course, they got a good tight end. Scadaboo can catch out of the backfield. And then you got those flyers for Iowa State as far as wide receivers and Higgins and Noel. I lean Iowa State. I didn't get involved with this one, guys. I lean Iowa State. The Jordan Tyson injury really kind of put it to a lean that way. I was right down the middle. And then when I saw Tyson, of course, got injured last week with that collarbone, I thought, boy, I think it's going to be tough for them to consistently move the ball. It's going to be fun to watch if Scadaboo tears apart that 335, though.
Scott Spreitzer, DocSports.com, joining us here as he does each and every Friday. All right, Texas and Georgia, as Georgia has a record of just 1-6 against the spread in conference play this year. The Longhorns are favored, but less than a field goal at 2.5. How are you handicapping this, especially when these teams have played each other already?
Yeah, that one cover was against Texas as they dominated in the trenches in that game. I just heard a little bit earlier today, I think it was Urban Meyer who said that Texas is sending tickets back because they couldn't get enough buyers to head to Atlanta. And, obviously this isn't a home game for Georgia, but it is in a sense. So I think you got to give like 1.5 points, not the normal amount of points for Georgia if they were playing at home between the hedges. But I think it's worth 1.5 points. And Texas not selling out their allotment kind of surprised me a little bit. I guess they're saving money for the postseason. Yep. But the bottom line is that, Carson Beck played badly, 3 picks, 56% passing, and they still whipped Texas
3.
Because they owned them in the trenches. Texas allows 1.4 sacks per game, except for against Georgia where they gave up 7. I don't know how they get that back together. The only real chance that I think Texas has here is if Georgia's defense is worn, thin from that 8 overtime game last week, if they're, a little bit, still kind of worn out. Other than that, I think Georgia wins again.
Next one, Scott. Penn State taking on Oregon, -3.5. Can Oregon get off? Can their offense dominate Penn State's defense, or do you see a very physical, close game here?
Yeah, Oregon's offense got healthy the last couple of weeks.
Yes.
That means Tez Johnson, a wide receiver's back, great offensive line. How about this? Remember the first 2 games this year, Oregon was a little sluggish. They gave up, I think it was, I don't know what it was, like 5 sacks or 7 sacks in their first 2 games. They've given up a grand total of 5 sacks in the last 10 games. Talk about getting it together. And I've been kind of talking about this and saying, this is a big game. Guess what James Franklin does in big games?
Yeah.
1-13. Mm-hmm. He had that win in 2016 and against Wisconsin, and that's been it. So I just think this is a tough spot for Penn State. They faced 2 decent offenses this season, shredded by USC, and gave up over 170 yards rushing to Ohio State when the Buckeyes were going with the patchwork offensive line. I like Oregon here. I think they get the job done.
All right, number 8, SMU. They can complete a perfect run through their first ACC season in the title game against Clemson. How you handicapping this?
This is one of those games where I think you have an option of trying to think, okay, is SMU playing so well over the last several games because they switched to Kevin Jennings at quarterback? Or your other choice, you could say it's been a very soft schedule for SMU. But as one better pointed out, a friend of mine earlier this week, SMU's not played a single team power rated inside the top 50 since October 5th, 7 games ago. Having said all of that,
one,
Rashard Smith, the running back. I like Kevin Jennings at quarterback, and it's not your typical Dabo defense. Outside the top 70 defending the run. And if you take the Citadel out of the mix, the last 4 games other than Citadel, Clemson's 2-2. They lost to South Carolina. They lost to Louisville. And one of the 2 wins came by just 4 points against Pitt on a touchdown with a minute to go in the game. I think SMU gets them here.
All right, last but not least, got about a minute here, Scott. Seahawks visiting the Cardinals. Last time I looked, it's -2.5 for the Cardinals.
Yeah, 2.5, some threes out there. I like Arizona here. They've been a moneymaker. They've covered 8 of 12. The scary part is that Kyler's 1-5 straight up as a home favorite, and Seattle has dominated the series as of late. But that 16-6 loss was close. Pick 6 extended the Seattle lead. Arizona, they got to get over these red zone problems. 6 trips last week, 1 touchdown, 4 field goals. But it's a third road game in 4 weeks for Seattle, and Arizona's defense is playing well. 54 points allowed the last 4 games. They've held those opponents 70 yards rushing, 3.5 per carry, 214 passing yards per game. Keep the defense playing great. Give James Conner many more carries than we saw out of Arizona in the first meeting, and I think Arizona gets it done.
Scott, have a great weekend. Thank you.
Take care, guys. Good luck.
That's Scott Spreitzer, DocSports.com. Check him out. He does all the sports up on that site, or you can follow him on X at Scott Wins. We got our weekly locks. It's what you all were waiting for. That's next with Rocket Minucci, Jimmy B, Fox Sports 910.
Kick off the football season with Twin Peaks, Rock, Minucci.